Hi, A-Pushers. This is Mr. Grayson coming at you with a video on the Age of Reform. You just heard all about the Second Great Awakening, which is perfect because it is one of the main reasons why the Age of Reform happens. The First Great Awakening's Calvinist ideals of predestination are out the door for the most part, and a belief that you can control your fate through good work, through reforming yourself, that is kind of the new message to some degree. And with that, if you're already reforming yourself, if you're already trying to make you a better you, why not make society better at the same time? Do good works to your community, and in that way earn yourself a place in heaven, or at least that is along the lines of thought then. This movement mostly was taking place in the North and Northeast. So this is very sectional in that the South did not take part in an age of reform to the same extent. Some of the areas of reform will include a temperance movement for alcohol, public education for all, prison reform, women's suffrage, and abolition. Let's start with public education. If you want to better someone's lot in life, a great idea would be to get them educated. So universal, free public education that's accessible to all children is something that a man named Horace Mann will push for very vehemently. He was the secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education starting in 1837, and he is going to push for public school for all children that's free and accessible, that teaches democratic values, that teaches everyone to read and write, that is compulsory in that everyone has to attend, or all children have to attend. And the idea here is multiple-fold. One, social mobility and accessibility to better jobs, better pay, better life is more possible by being educated. So you're helping create equity in society by putting everyone on a level playing field, getting the same quality education. Because otherwise, you just have the wealthy who are able to afford tutors for their children, and the poor go uneducated. So Horace Mann, not okay with that. Let's get everyone universal public education. Another intent is that they're seeing all of these new immigrants flowing in who have different cultures, different ideals, different levels of education. And in order to try to somewhat impose American values upon them, public education would be able to do this and provide this to them. Wouldn't it be great if one standardized textbook could do it all? Well, William McGuffey comes through with his McGuffey Reader. This book was widely used throughout public schooling. It taught literacy, so it taught how to read and write, but it also wove moral lessons into the stories and passages that were used. So this book was widely used throughout public schooling of the era and beyond. Along the same lines as public education, prison reform will take place and have some similar goals. The name to know is Dorothy Dix. Dorothy was a public school teacher, and on her weekends taught Sunday school. She would go to a local prison and teach Sunday school to the young women there. And while she visited, she noticed that there were terrible conditions that these young women were enduring in the prison. So Dorothy started going to multiple prisons and inspecting the conditions there, and found that corporal punishment was being used, abuse, neglect, and many of the people that were in prison had mental disabilities or mental disorders that were kind of the root cause behind some of their criminal activity. So she proposed that a separate institution be created for this group of people. This is going to be the asylum movement, where psychiatric hospitals are created for people with these mental disorders that are leading to their antisocial behavior. She starts taking data on all these prisons, taking notes, creating reports, and presenting these reports to state congresses, asking for public institutions to be created for these mentally disabled prisoners. Another goal of Dorothy's with regard to prison reform was rehabilitation rather than pure punitive penalty. So the idea would be try to help reform these prisoners so they could maybe once again re-enter society rather than just give up on them and have them serve their prison time for the rest of their lives. The temperance movement is up next. So America had a problem in the early 1800s with alcohol. Now, it's hard to come by fresh water sources that are free of any kind of bacterial contamination, and that's part of the reason why alcohol was added to drinks to some degree. So, you were safer drinking a glass of whiskey than you were some contaminated water you might have had access to in some cases. So there's a little bit of that going on. Alcohol becomes the drink of choice, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for most men especially, and the per capita or per head average of consumption of alcohol in America in the early 1800s is about somewhere like 5 gallons to 7 gallons per person per year. And it's mostly hard alcohol like whiskey. So with that said, employers are not happy about the effect of this. People are coming in drunk to work, not being efficient, being late, not arriving at all. Wives are upset about this at home. They are losing their husbands to the drink and are having to raise their families kind of solo to some degree while the husband goes straight out to the saloon after work. All of this is seen as another ill of society to reform, and a movement is created around it. It is known as the Temperance movement. The name to associate it with it is Lyman Beecher. I love Lyman for a couple of reasons. One is because his daughter is going to become super famous as a fellow reformer, but in a different respect. His daughter is Harriet Beecher, and then she gets married, so it becomes Harriet Beecher Stowe. If you recognize her name, it's because she's one of the most famous authors of all time. She wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, of which we'll talk a whole bunch more about leading up to the Civil War. But it's a family of reformers. The daughter's an abolitionist. The dad is a temperance movement leader. So Lyman Beecher is a Presbyterian minister. He is one of the people that helps found the American Temperance Society in 1826, and they push for people to temper their drinking. Don't have a lot. Try not to have any at all if possible. Now, the temperance movement doesn't start off as a stop drinking altogether now movement. It slowly becomes something like that. But at first, it's just try to drink in moderation, don't get drunk, be responsible. With time, in Britain, there's a movement called teetotalism, and that is where you voluntarily agree to complete abstinence from drinking. Teetotalism makes its way over to America and essentially does become part of this temperance movement to where people are asked to voluntarily abstain from drinking. Now, we get further down into the 1800s, like 1870s, and we will get some pretty neat groups coming up, like the Anti-Saloon League, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU. In 1874, they form and Carrie A. Nation, formerly Carrie Amelia Moore was her name, then she got married and it became Carrie A. Nation, which kind of sounds cool, like she's carrying a nation. But Carrie A. Nation is going to be one of the leading members of the WCTU, and she'll be famous for taking a hatchet and literally going into saloons and hacking up the kegs of liquor. She at times will get arrested, and most of the time not pay the fine and get off with that. But that's not until a much later period of time. It's outside Unit 4, so I will stop talking about her right now. But the temperance movement lives on. Another thing that gets confused a lot with temperance is the prohibition movement. Now, it's kind of one and the same to some degree. They're both anti-alcohol. However, a difference would be prohibition is fighting for a legal end to alcohol. Like, you are not allowed to sell it, to drink it. It's law. That's going to be at the turn of the century in the 1900s, and there will be a Prohibition Amendment. So the 18th Amendment will ban drinking, ban the selling of alcohol, but ultimately the 21st Amendment will undo that in 1933. So we are getting very ahead of ourselves. I just wanted to explain that there is a difference with prohibition. Temperance was more so voluntarily agreeing to drink less or drink not at all, but it was more voluntary. Now, if women are having all these prominent roles in reform movements at the time, it would only make sense that they would probably start a reform movement of their own for their own rights, and they do. The year to know for this is 1848. The term to memorize is the Seneca Falls Convention. Why is this so important? Well, Seneca Falls is a place in New York, and a convention of over 200 women, 300 people total about, met at this church, Wesleyan Church, in Seneca Falls, New York. The year was 1848. The topic was women's rights. They focused primarily on the right to vote, which is known as suffrage. So this is the start of the women's suffrage movement. The chief achievement of this convention was that a Declaration of Sentiments was created. It was modeled after the Declaration of Independence from 1776, but instead of having a section of grievances towards the British King and Parliament, there was grievances toward man. So see what they're trying to do here at this convention? It's brilliant. They're trying to draw parallels between the complete, utter disregard of American colonists' rights under the British Crown to complete, utter disregard of women's rights now in this country currently. One of the lines specifically, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal." The guiding principle here is that equality is needed for both men and women. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott were instrumental in getting this convention together and leading this convention, and ultimately they will continue to go on as premier actors in the women's rights movement. Women will not get the right to vote all the way until 1919, though, with the 19th Amendment. So, that being very unfortunate, this early suffrage movement did get the ball rolling, at least. Now, why didn't progress come sooner? Well, many will blame the Civil War and all the tensions leading up to it, and then the repair efforts afterwards during Reconstruction. All of that becomes a bit of a distraction from the goal of women getting the right to vote. The final reform movement I wanted to briefly touch up on is abolition. Now, you will get an entire video on this in a moment, so I'll be brief. Abolition is the fight against slavery, and you have different variations of abolition. You have those who are radical abolitionists. They want slavery to end right here, right now. They don't want any compensation for slave owners because they shouldn't have had slaves in the first place. People who fall in this category include William Lloyd Garrison. William Lloyd Garrison was a white man. He opened a newspaper publishing company. They published The Liberator, and he used moral suasion, which is appealing to people on a moral level, saying that slavery is wrong on that ground, in order to try to convince people that it needed to end. Miss Ulrich will talk to you about a few other very famous, very significant abolitionists in a moment. So there you have it. This concludes the video on Age of Reform. All right, I hope you have a great rest of the day.